ko aho te kaiwhakahare o te Pūtahi Centre for Architecture and City Making. So good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us online and here in person at Tūranga. I'm Jessica Halliday, the Director of Te Pūtahi Centre for Architecture and City Making, and it's my pleasure to welcome you and to briefly outline tonight's proceedings for Christchurch Conversations, Reaching a Happy Medium in Urban Housing. For those of you who are new to this series and to Te Pūtahi, we're an independent third sector, sometimes known as not-for-profit, the non-sector, organisation who've been working here in Ōtautahi for over 10 years, seeking to make it easy, desirable and fun for more people to get involved in the shaping and enjoyment of Ōtautahi Christchurch. Ultimately, we want our region to have healthier and more equitable urban and living systems. Christchurch Conversations He Whakawhiti Kōrero began 9 years ago in 2014, initiated by the Christchurch City Council, who are our major supporter for this series. It's a program of free events that invites local, national and international speakers and leaders to address vital urban issues and concerns for our city's future. And I've just been told there's no sound on the live stream. Tonight's is the third of 4 conversations this year. I'd like to thank those who have made tonight's event possible through their financial support. He Whakawhiti Kōrero Christchurch Conversations is funded through the Christchurch City Council's Sustainability Fund and supported by He Puna Ora Regenerative Action Lab at AUT. To briefly outline the shape of the evening, tonight you'll hear from a mix of people with both specialist expertise and those with lived experience. We'll hear from 3 speakers who all work in different areas of urbanism in Aotearoa. Guy Marriage, an architect and academic who really has set himself up and is appreciated for being New Zealand's leading expert on denser housing in this country. Annie Wilson, who leads Kāinga Maha, a not-for-profit development organisation here in Ōtautahi, and Lynette Ellis, who is the head of Transport and Waste at Christchurch City Council. They will speak in that order, and interspersed between them are 3 sets of people who live in a variety of denser housing here in Ōtautahi. I think often we forget that people live in this housing, not some abstract figure, but actual living people. So we're going to hear from 3 groups of them tonight. Alara, who has lived nearly her full 9 years of life in apartments in Christchurch. Sophie, who lives in Maryvale, and Tracey and Gareth, who live in a residential area just east of the central city with their greyhound, Nando. After all those presentations, Guy, Annie and Lynette will join me for a panel with a Q&A. And this is when you'll be able to ask questions as well. Sorry, it's getting a bit fast. And I'll tell you about that in a second. And then we'll close with some poetry from Ben O'Connell. Please note that to save time, we won't be individually introducing each speaker. They'll simply follow each other without interruption. So asking questions, whether you're attending this event online or you're here in the room at Tūranga, you can ask the panel questions by texting your question to this phone number, 020 411 09415. That number will be on the screen during the panel as well. You can record it now, but then you'll be able to see it during the Q&A. Our online audience, you are most welcome to ask your questions via the chat function on YouTube. And questions from both sources are conveyed to the panel by the Te Pūtahi team. Apologies in advance, there's every chance we won't be able to put all your questions to the panel. And if there aren't too many that are unanswered, we'll ask the panel kindly if they can provide any answers afterwards that we can post on social media after the event. So the purpose of tonight's event is to have a constructive conversation on the nature, purpose and possibilities of denser housing in the city. The reality is that independent of district plans, changing national policy statements, legislation, medium density housing is already here. And in fact, if you're like me and you know anything about our architectural history, it's been here for well over 50, if not 60, maybe even longer years. It isn't entirely new. And it's definitely going to be part of our future. And we recognise that this makes some people anxious and fearful and worried, and for lots of different reasons. But it is going to be here. So tonight, it's part of our future, regardless of who's in government. So tonight we've invited our speakers to talk about what it is, why it's important to do it and to do it well, the benefits it can bring, and what we can do to ensure that it is a positive part of the future of our city. And as I mentioned, we've also asked those who live in denser housing to share something of their experience so we can learn from them too. I'd love to welcome, and please welcome, Guy Marriage to kick off this conversation.
Kia ora tātou. Hopefully the people online can hear by now. Do we know if they're hearing? Great. Look, I'm going to launch. I've got quite a few slides, so I'm just going to talk quite fast about what I've got to present to you. So just in terms of who I am, so that's sort of the title slide. This is just a little bit about me. I'll let you just have a read on that. So I'm an architect. I'm also a lecturer at Victoria University in Wellington, and I've written 3 books, and I've been living in medium density housing for about the last 33 years, I think, and live in an apartment building that I designed, and yeah, so I'm reasonably au fait with the subject. This is be good if we can get that to work. Okay. So the question arises first, the future of Christchurch. And so I did this wonderfully detailed graphic for you. So Christchurch, this is the forecast from that I found online that you're working to. So at the moment we've got this many people on the left and projected in 30 years to have that many people. So that's 145,000 extra people, which means about 63,000 new homes. And if we look at the size of that, that's going to mean that we're going to need to have at least 3,000 hectares of land if we do it in the traditional manner. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm quite fond of the Canterbury Plains being the Canterbury Plains and not being the Canterbury suburbs. So I'm quite keen to see if I can help encourage people to develop Canterbury in a way that's more sustainable. And so that means really medium density housing. If we look out 60 years, this is again from greaterchristchurch.org, so they're talking about that potentially there could be up to 500,000 people. Double to 1 million people. So from 500,000 people sort of in the greater Canterbury region. But the question that hasn't been answered at all is where are they going to go? So there's potentially over the next 30, 40, 50, 60 years going to be a lot more people around here. And I don't know about you, but I think that we need to make sure that they don't just keep on spreading outwards as it seems to be happening at the moment. So this is what we've had in the past. That's a sort of graphic depiction, vaguely accurate, of 1 house per quarter acre, which is what we had when some of you were around in your younger days, perhaps the 1930s, 40s, that was one of the standards. We've moved on from there to, this is a little touchy, there we go. So this is still low density, where we're looking at sort of double that with 2 houses on every quarter section. So that gets us to the rating of the way that we sort of figure out what is medium density and what is not. So we're getting to 20 dwellings per hectare, and then obviously that goes off. That's not good. That's potential. That something is. I'll just keep on talking. But so while the tech team find a way of doing that, is there anything I should be doing up here? So we get on to this, which is sort of where we're at the moment, and which has been encouraged by the last government's workings to get to 3 houses per section. And so we've got this, which is about 30 dwellings per hectare. But the thing is, it's not really even getting to medium density yet. So you might think it's medium density, and you might be saying, I don't want medium density because I don't want this. The problem is that's not even medium density. So what we're doing in the sort of medium density world is that we're doing it wrong at the moment. So we need to do it different and do it better. That's my argument. So we have what I term the curse of the side yard, or the lack of. So this is a photo taken a few weeks back in Rolleston, anonymous house, but so this is the sort of thing which is going up all over Canterbury Plains. So you can see we've still got suburbia, but we don't really have much usable space. There's just enough room to park your 1, 2 or 3 cars, or your ute, or do people have boats down here? But we're still, it's still very low density in terms of getting towards medium density. This is obviously very highly sensitive thing. I've got to point it like that. So the question then arises, what is medium density housing? And so I'm just going to try and talk about that a little bit here. So what we can see here is what Brands and MB have talked about as Category 1 medium density. So 1 to 2 story attached houses such as duplexes. And you will all be aware there's a lot of this going up around Canterbury, most of it fairly low quality in terms of its level of trying to be more than that. But so Brands have actually said there's 3 separate categories for medium density, and so they've done this study. They've done a lot of study over the years, and they came up with these 3 categories that you can see there. So category 3 is sort of the area where we're really starting to get some good flow-on effects. So 3 to 6 story apartments is really what we need to be aiming for to get a far better, denser city. And there's lots of advantages if we do that. So there's a number of different types of housing. So there's a phenomenon known as the missing middle, which, hands up here, anybody that's heard of the missing middle? Okay, that's about half, which is good. So it's an American term. So it's talking about where you have single family homes or you have apartment buildings, and then there's this big chunk in the middle which just isn't there in America. It's not really there in New Zealand. It is there in spades in Europe. So the European sort of style of living, and most people, have people here been to Europe? Hands up. Most people have been to Europe, well-educated audience, which is great. And you've probably stayed in places like this, and you probably know what I'm talking about, where we have a much denser city in most European cities. Some people will say you can't be dense in New Zealand. You can't do that. You can't look at a European standard. But I'm firmly of the belief that actually you can and that we need to. So what I'm saying, therefore, is no more of this, no more of that. Maybe the answer is in tall townhouses, and maybe the answer is, or definitely the answer is apartments. And so we need to get a lot better at designing taller buildings and denser buildings, but more quality for that size of building as well. Amazing, I've got to focus it right on your nose, and it works perfectly. So the question arises, why medium density? And so these pictures are both of the Canterbury Plains, taken off aerial shots just from the other week. So on the left is what we traditionally think of the Canterbury Plains, but actually we've got this sort of thing happening. And this is Rolleston, where I was, and you can see it just creeping over and subsuming all that wonderful farmland with some really banal architecture. I'm sorry, does anybody here live in Rolleston? Be honest, put your hand up. Fantastic, sir. I'm going to be focusing on you a lot tonight, so sorry about that. But so this sort of thing, and this is not Rolleston, but this is somewhere in New Zealand, I believe. And so we have this sort of thing, and you can see here we're still reaching a density of about 30 maximum. So there's about 120 houses there, I counted them up. But there's virtually no common spaces. So everybody has their own front yard and side yards and backyards. But there's nothing really that we can do with a bit of common space. I found there's actually a little walkway through here. So there is, you can just see a little Y-shaped walkway go through the bottom. There's no planting. I'm not sure if anybody would ever want to walk through there. Perhaps one day somebody will plant something. But it's not really the sort of beautiful outdoor space that we might want to see. So we're going to be aiming more at this sort of thing. And so you have been seeing this going up in the the east frame, what do we call it now, One Central nearby. And there's some of the architects of part of that in the room, which is good. But so if we look at this actually gets us to a dwelling rate of about 250, or up to 250 dwellings per hectare, so it's significantly more housing. And so that's where each of these is an apartment. So you can see here we've got 4-storey high apartments stacked up like that. And again, this is roughly to scale, so each apartment's about 84 square metres, which is a good 2-bedroom apartment. And so that's still only 50% ground coverage. But it still doesn't look particularly, a lot of you might be sitting there thinking, well, I don't want to live in that either. So that's how we need to work on the density, but we also need to work on the design as well. So what we're aiming for really is, if we rearrange it and if we design our apartment buildings and our medium density housing around public space. And so the important thing is to actually design the public space first. So otherwise the danger is you design the buildings and then the in-between space gets filled up with cars, which is, you will have seen that, a lot of that going around. But so this is where we need to be quite rigorous about saying, actually, if you're working on a big scheme like this, it's easier on a big scheme, it's obviously harder on a small scheme, but you need to be able to design it for these central spaces to actually work on creating a good space first before we then go on to design the housing around the edge of it. So I was trying to look at the subsoil situation of Canterbury, and this, I'm not sure if I've done this completely correctly, but this is off the council, the Canterbury Council regional maps, and so this, it says this is the subsoil condition, which to me seems to be all the same. In what it's saying is it's shingle everywhere, but you can see the flow from the rivers over the years, and so that's the way it's been built up, and we know pretty much that actually it is shingle everywhere. But it's interesting, there's hardly any other sorts of soils coming up. But what we have, this is a picture from Wellington, but what we have to remember is that while the soil's on the surface, which the shingle may look like they're solid, but this is what's happening below the surface. So there is, of course, waterways, and we all know about that from everything that's been happening in Canterbury over the last couple of decades, is that the water is there flowing just below the surface. And that's the way that water does. Water doesn't only stay in the rivers, it hops about wherever it can. It leaks out and it goes everywhere it can. And so this is a map of central Wellington, Te Aro, where I live. And it's sort of a little bit horrifying when you realise that actually on Te Aro, the whole thing is a giant ball of jelly with mud on top, and some scattered handfuls of shingle around the place. You've got a similar sort of thing, but more shingle, less mud, more jelly perhaps, and deeper jelly. So ours goes down about 40 to 50 metres. Yours goes down 500 metres of shingle and jelly. So we you really have to, and I'm sure you're all aware, you have to pay attention to what's happening with the soil. That's the key thing. See, when I press this, I'm not sure if you're making it go ahead or if I'm just pointing this at you and then you make it go ahead. It's one of those tricky things of modern technology. This is what happened a year ago, where the government had an idea to make everything a lot denser, and so we call it medium density residential standards, MDRS. But with a new government in, which has been in for half a day so far, they're not quite sure whether they want to agree with this anymore. So it's all up for grabs because they've got partners that may say no to this. So this system, which we thought was where we were going to be basing the future of the country on, it may all be gone as well. So I'm going to skip firmly over that one, but we know that that's changed, or will keep changing. This is a sort of development in New Zealand and this posted up online by a developer who was very happy with this as a proposal, but it's a suburbia which is really focused on vehicles. So suburbia is already focused on vehicles, and in this case they said, look, we're doing this great urban design job. I would disagree though whether it's a great urban design job. If you look at the terms of common space, it's nearly all for parking or for driving your cars around. There is a tiny little patch of green, which I suspect is for walking your dog so it can have a pee. Personally, I don't call that great common space allocation. So yeah, not that good a solution perhaps. What we, if we have a look at, this is a similar, slightly larger, but a similar sized version. This is in Bedford Square in London, near where I used to live. And so it's sort of similar, but here they've got the public spaces enshrined in the middle, and the housing is around the outside, and there's no way that anybody is allowed to park their car in the centre of that space. That's a picture on the right of what it's like. It looks like it's just a forest of trees, but actually there's a lovely big piece of park there where I used to go and have my lunch. I worked in one of these buildings, and it's just next to the British Museum, so it's right in the centre of the city, highly sought after, designed by Robert Adam in year 1760 or something, but they're good buildings. They're good. They were built as 5-storey high houses, but they're actually typically now 5 single-storey flats or sometimes commercial buildings. This is Bloomsbury Square on the left, Soho Square on the right. Soho Square was my home square. So you can see that. So there's thousands of people that live around here, but you can have moments of calm and peace and quiet in an oasis, or you can have an area which is packed full of people, and both of those add to the vitality of things. I doubt that you're going to see this in your local suburb with this many people. I doubt that you're going to see that in that previous shot where they were all trying to walk their dog on that one piece of green. You need to have good quality outdoor space, and that needs to be designed first. So urban design and landscape design are really key parts of that. There's another shot of Bloomsbury Square, so you can see the path there. And if we have a look at that a little closer, we can see that actually these are 5-storey buildings around the perimeter. So when some of you will have heard that you can have buildings up to 6 stories tall, and I know that some of you will have thought, my God, that's outrageous. I can't stand having a 6-storey building near my place. That's just terrible. It must not happen. Has anybody felt like that? I suspect there's maybe some people have. Maybe you're not going to voice it today, but that's a 5-storey building. And on the right is a really grand, or in the middle is a really grand 3-storey building. So, you know, you can actually have taller buildings, and life doesn't stop, and it can actually work really well. So I was talking to a potential client today, and they were saying we're thinking of 2 stories, and I was saying go taller, go 3, go 4 if we can. You know, we need to have more density. We need to have taller buildings to get this density up. So the question is whether we have this already in Canterbury, and we do, of course. We've got Cranmer Square, which had, as you all know, had this wonderful old building which I really loved, which has sadly gone. But you know, we do have these spaces which can be brought back. But at the moment, the architecture going up around them is, I think, probably a little timid. It's still staying at that sort of 2, maybe 3 stories. Any further than that, Jasper? Are there any going up to 4 around there? I think it's mainly 2 to 3, I think. And so that's, you know, I think we're missing out on a chance to actually get some real architecture there by actually building denser and higher. Sorry, I know I'm repeating myself. I'm trying to really drum this message in, especially to anybody from the council out there that might be thinking of this. So look, there's a number of challenges that we have, and so I'll just leave you to have a look through those. You know, these are all things that have been levelled as problems against medium density. And if we look at some potential answers, you know, if there's no room for children, as it says, refer above, design a mixture of units. Don't just design 2-storey townhouses everywhere, okay? It's really important to have a mix of 1-storey, 1-bedroom, you know, 2-storey, 3-storey, 3-bedroom, etc., 4-bedroom, 5-bedroom. Families come in all different sizes. I met somebody yesterday who had 5 kids, same age as me, and I was astounded that anybody would want 5 kids. But you know, nonetheless, he has to find a house that's big enough for 5 kids, and not just shove them all in 1 bedroom. But so yeah, there's a whole lot of things here, and we can dwell over them some more. But I'll move on. But so you know, you need to really think about. I mean, one of the questions that was said to me, medium density. There's nowhere to store the boats. I don't think we should be designing medium density so that you can store the boats. You know, stick your boat in the ocean or in the marina and have medium density for the people that live there is more important to me. Staring into the neighbour's apartment, never a good idea. Don't be a perv. Don't stare into their apartment. Draw the curtains. It's a pretty simple answer, you know. It's not a great problem. And all over the world, people live in medium density housing. Jessica said maybe 50 to 60 years. It's actually back 2,000 or 3,000 years. The Romans used to have multi-story. 50 or 60 years in Christchurch. But, you know, going back, it's been the predominant way. The perversion of the modern world is the suburb. That's the thing that has not been going on for long. So when you think we can't do away with our suburbs, we've actually got it really wrong, because it's the other way around. Suburbs are the perversion, and they really need to be wiped out. I hope. Now, I know that you'll all go home to your suburb tonight. But so there's also questions, you know, medium density done well, are there examples of it? So this, we already have some great examples in Canterbury, and there's some examples from elsewhere in the world. This one at the top, Wellington, that was 8 townhouses that have replaced one single house on Mount Victoria. Council hated it when they first heard about it, and now they absolutely love it. And New York, where there's lots of places where you can sit outside and enjoy the sunshine. We've got some great examples here from Peter Bevan, one of our much loved architects, and so St Mary's Apartments, which was a really good scheme designed around 2 central courtyards. Anybody live in St Mary's? No? It's a pity. I've heard that it's really lovely, and it is really lovely, but we're just going to move on if I can. So the courtyard is small, but it's a communal courtyard. It's available for everybody. Nobody has a side yard or a front yard. You all just have a space. And so that sort of thing is, talk about this in this book, which I have got some copies of this book if anybody wants a copy later. I've got a couple of copies up here. And so we're also going to be talking about, I'm going to leave this up to somebody else, talking about problems such as how do you collect the waste and things like that. So I don't have an answer to that, so I'm going to hand that over to somebody else. Next steps for making sure that we do it well. So there's a number of things here, a number of different ways that we can do it. We don't have to do everything the same way. We don't have to have them all the same. There are different ways that can be done. I have got to wrap it up and go. So remember that the key part of all this is that you're designing the community around the space. This is the local corner store where I lived in London, where I bought all my groceries for 10 years. It's been there for a while, as you can see. And finally, just some pictures from some wonderful sort of shared facilities that we see. So we've got Nightingale on the left in Australia, 26 Araha in Auckland, and Beaumont Quarter in Auckland. So it is already happening. If you have good architects and some great developers who are going to back them, we can already do this. So that's me. I'm going to hand over to the next person, I believe, which is Alara. Alara?
Hi, my name is Alara. I'm almost 12 and I've been living in medium density since I was 11 months old. Living in an apartment in the city was the perfect choice for my family when I was little. It was close to their workplaces and there were so many fun things to do outside, like going to the botanic gardens and exploring new parks. I had a few favourite places from when I was younger: the museum, the toy library, and Margaret Mayhew Playground. As I grew older, there were still options for my interests. Tauranga Library became my new playground, and Rollickin' Gelato was like my museum, a building showcasing all the wonderful flavours of ice cream. Ooh. There we go. A big upside of living in the city is that there's always something happening. It's awesome to have events like the Buskers Festival and Sparks in the Park right in my backyard. You don't even need to have to fight for a parking spot. It's better for your stress. I usually get around by walking and biking, but we still use our car for longer distances. Most days I bike to school with my dad and get picked up by family. I've recently been able to come home after school on my own by biking or busing as well. I feel pretty confident going by myself and I feel safe on the bus. Apartments are smaller than standalone houses, so it can be hard to host parties. So on my birthday, we have a tradition to host parties in the Botanic Gardens. We've done this every single year and it's worked out perfectly. Just after I turned 10, we moved to a new apartment. It was a massive change for me and my family because we'd been living there for almost 10 years, but we felt it was going to be beneficial as we were slowly outgrowing it anyway. The location of our new apartment was only 1 kilometre away from where we used to be, so everything was familiar and in walking distance, just like before. But we had new fun places nearby, like the Box Quarter, the Welder, and Cashew Mall. In terms of museums and playgrounds, these days Mecca, Grizzly, and Boba Lab have taken their place. Thank you.
Goodness, what an act to follow. That is just stealing everything of my presentation, so thank you, Alara. So I'm going to talk to you. Kia ora, everybody. My name's Annie Wilson. I work for an organisation called Kāinga Maha. We are a not-for-profit developer, which is probably an extremely foreign concept for most of you, but rest assured we do exist. And I've been invited today to talk to you a bit about what it means to build new communities thinking about people, so a people-centred approach to development. So hopefully you're encouraged and inspired, and I can share a little bit about how it is possible. So I'm going to try. You mastered this, Alara, but I am hopefully clearly not doing it. No, I've just pressed something else. Hang on. Yeah, here we go. I think I might just do this, and then if you can change the slides, that's probably better. So yeah, just a little bit about me. If you could just switch on to the next slide, please. So a little bit about me. I work for an organisation called Kāinga Maha. We are a not-for-profit developer. We've been working in existence for about 3 years, working across New Zealand. We were formed 3 years in response to essentially seeing the property sector take a very vanilla approach to creating communities. And do you know what? We thought, actually, New Zealand deserves better. Actually, perhaps there is a way that we can kind of put people first above profits and consider, actually, rather than generating a return and a short-sighted approach to value, think about how we can create beautiful places that are successful and thriving communities, and actually places where people want to live in the long term. So we are essentially, our vision is that every Kiwi has a house that they can afford, they can live in, and can live a wonderful, thriving life. It's really, really that simple. So we're not a community housing provider, we're not a for-profit developer, but essentially what we do is we take the commercial aspects of development as astute developers and actually build communities that people want to live in. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what that means and how that translates to our action. So we build homes for on our own developments, and we actually provide development management services for other organisations as well who have land and would like to realise both the value and also drive social, economic and environmental outcomes in the process. And so, yeah, we have been in existence for 3 years and have developed a project here in Christchurch, which I'm going to talk to you about in a moment. And we have our next project as well, which is really exciting. Thank you. So as an organisation, we have a number of guiding principles that essentially guide what we do and how we progress our developments. And they're really simple. We put people above profits. This doesn't mean that we have this black art in the way that we do development, and we're not immune to market forces and development viability and the need to get development finance. But it means that actually the way that we define our design, we look at our design guides, we look at typologies, we look at what kind of the solution and the development strategy is for a site is actually guided by how people will live in the places that we create. We build vibrant communities. I love what you were saying, Guy, and I'm sure that we've been kind of feeling the same things through our prep today, because what we believe in is the notion of actually building mixed communities, and that means mixed communities in its true sense. So mixed communities in the sense of catering for a wide variety of housing typologies and housing compositions, catering for a wide variety of incomes and ages and people, to reflect the wonderful vibrancy and diversity that is Aotearoa. We also believe in the concept that housing needs to be equitable in terms of design and the built form and tenure, and that housing needs to be affordable. And this is sort of a bit of a loaded relative concept here in New Zealand, in that we don't actually have a clear definition of what affordable means. But really, in what we do and how we approach developments is we consider what is affordable in the sense of if you were to purchase or rent a home, but also actually considering how affordable it is to run. So not just what's going to drive me the most profits as a developer, making a return or covering my costs, but actually for the end user, for the purchaser, for the renter, how affordable is this home going to be to manage and to maintain in the long term? So what is a people-centred approach to development? So as Guy has very eloquently set out, there's a housing shortage in Christchurch and a growing need for more housing. But fundamentally, if we continue with the status quo, we will be building homes and communities that will be completely ignorant to what means good housing design. So this process, a people-centred approach to development, is all about looking first at the communities that will be created and seeking to make a positive contribution to the neighbourhoods that we're building in. It's about putting people first and central to the decision-making and building development strategies where we've got a clear, coherent understanding of need, clear, coherent understanding of the local community context, and how, through our activity as a developer, we can make a positive contribution. So to do this, there are a couple of key ingredients that you need to have in the mix in order to truly be people-centred in your approach. And so the first one is that you need to, as I say, understand the local housing context and the local housing need. So this means that the solution that you land at as a developer is different for every site. As Guy says, there is a rule book in terms of kind of compliance and what the district plan sets in terms of setbacks and recession planes and densities and all of that. But actually what you do when you're looking at a people-centred approach is first take a step back before you even set your design brief with your architect and actually think, who are we looking to house here? What is the housing need? Whose housing needs are not being met currently? And how can we step into the gap? And this is why this slide, if we just go to the next slide, sorry, is quite poignant in that, we believe in the concept that actually, yes, New Zealand needs more housing. Kāinga Maha, our name, as it suggests, actually means many homes. But we don't think that it's just about homes. It's actually about communities. And fundamentally, we need the right type of housing. And so if we switch to the next slide, we love this sort of stuff in the housing world, particularly the affordable housing world. This is what we call the housing continuum, which essentially is just the ecosystem of housing. So you've got, on the red, the tenures that are addressing the acute housing need through to the other end of the spectrum, which is those that can afford to meet their own housing needs by their own means. And by taking a people-centred approach and by understanding firstly the housing context, looking at affordability, considering what typologies need to be catered for in this community that aren't being catered if just left to the market, you actually create a development strategy that considers that takes into consideration what proportion of the homes that I'm creating on my new subdivision need to be affordable, need to be for people who need some assistance in order to be housed, because let's face it, housing is a human right. How many of the homes do we need to create, and what typology do they need to be, and what price do they need to be set at to ensure that they are affordable to the generation that is stuck in rental accommodation, that needs to be affordable to those people who are critical in maintaining and strengthening our economic strength as a city. And so this is fundamentally why number one ingredient is about understanding the housing context and taking that evidence-based approach to your development solution. The second key aspect to a people-centred approach is that we can't do this alone. We need to develop our vision through partnering with integrity. And that means that we have to work with our communities so often, and I think it's a little bit of the victim of the planning system that we have here, where you can have, your non-discretionary kind of approach to development, in that you don't often find developers who actually speak to the local community and find out what are the issues, what do we need to address here. We fundamentally believe that actually as a developer, it's not just about us driving value through securing resource consent and developing out and selling the homes, but actually as a developer, we're driving what we call social value. And that means that we need to work with the community to understand what are some of the social, economic and environmental concerns that are key to the local community that we need to address, whether that's crime, car crime, and how can we then, in our design, seek to address that. So it's absolutely critical that you consult with your community. And I believe, and I completely support what you said, Guy, about the examples in terms of medium density that we see over in Europe. But and I'm saying this as a Yorkshire Hungarian, that we can't take that Eurocentric approach in New Zealand. And I've learned a huge amount being over 19 years of experience in development, but coming to New Zealand and realising actually, if we are truly going to be making and seeking to address the needs of the people of New Zealand, we actually need to be speaking to people and ensuring that we are consulting and giving a voice to those underrepresented groups, because if we don't, we risk displacing them, and that's absolutely not what we're about. And the wonderful thing is, and don't tell people, but actually when you take a place-based approach to development, it drives value, not only sort of social value, but actually it makes commercial sense. It's what we call in the development world place value uplift. And there are many examples of this overseas, many studies as well, and perhaps something you guys would like to study to see actually that there is a tangible increase in value when you create places, when you think about people, and when you think about that kind of good urban development and public realm, and how communities and people will work together. So just a couple of benefits and key ones that I would like to point out to you today. It creates a sense of belonging for people. We've already heard from Alara, and we'll hear from many more, that people are proud. When you think about how people are going to be activating and working and living in these areas and these new communities, they actually really enjoy living there, and there's a place of identity that they find. When you take a people-centred approach and you look at consulting with your community, actually it builds local agency, and it can build local resilience and strengthen the local economy. So the final ingredients to taking a place-based approach to development, which if you could just swing through, this is the final ingredients, which is designing for place, community and belonging. And I am absolutely no architect or urban designer, so I feel woefully unqualified to set out what that means. But certainly in the last 18, 19 years of my experience, I can see I have understood what the key ingredients are and key parameters, if you like, that make for a successful place. So I'll just quickly canter through those if I can. So I love this quote because it's true. It's the built environment, the property, the real estate touches on every single human. It impacts how we live, how we socialise, how we relate to others. So really, there is absolutely no excuse for good design. So some of the key ingredients and parameters that I believe a good designer, a good developer should be looking for, and I annoyingly did it so it kind of goes through. So if you could just click through the list, and I'll just quickly canter through them for the sake of time. And there are lots of things, actually, that Guy has already said, so I feel quite chuffed being a non-designer. But places need to get better over time. You know, you look at the examples that Guy said, and actually there were some amazing examples of places where, over time, they've actually got better. You know, we need to get away from thinking about 50 years and, you know, is it going to last 50 years and then we knock it down and rebuild it? But actually, is this a place that through people loving and identifying a sense of getting a sense of identity and community through the place that they live, actually that's going to create value and people are going to want to live there, and desirability. We need to think about designing in cohesion. A really key parameter for Kāinga Maha is that we actually design to tenure blind, so that you cannot differentiate between, you know, the haves and the have-nots, which tenure is for which cohort and housing need. You've got to build places where you evoke a sense of community, and a lot of these things and belonging are different for each different project, and I must emphasise that. Because, you know, every site is different and has its constraints. You've got to engender security, thinking about avoiding high-level walkways, poorly overlooked spaces, thinking about the shared spaces, the relationship to the street, the garden, the corridors. And I'm going to just move on because I'm being told that I need to hurry up. So I'll just give you a couple of examples that Kāinga Maha has delivered, and we're really proud of this next project. It's an example here in Christchurch, so if we can just quickly go through to the Karamu slide. So the first project of ours is the residences at Karamu, and this is a project that we delivered. We acquired the land from Ngāi Properties, and we delivered 84 homes, a mixture of 2 and 3 bedroom homes. The development's been complete for about a year now. And you can just see we've won a few awards, which is really cool to actually get the accolades and get the recognition for what we've done. And so, yeah, we developed the development with 84 homes, a mixture of 2 and 3 bedroom homes in response to need. And in addition to that, we had no obligation to do this, but we actually delivered a mixture of social housing. So we partnered with some community housing providers to deliver some high-quality Homestar 7 homes, so really well-performing, thermally efficient homes. If it gives you just a bit of a context, the building code is around 3, 4, or 3 at the time. I see Ribs in the room, so he'll probably correct me, but the Homestar 7 is substantially higher than the minimum that developers need to build at, and they were for the affordable. And we delivered a third of the homes for first home buyers that were priced at around 34% of the medium household income, and then the remaining balance were built and sold to private developers. You cannot tell which homes are for which tenure, and we took a really place-based approach while we've been working with the community to really build community cohesion post-completion of the project, so facilitating barbecues and engagement and thinking about activating some of the communal spaces as well, and that's really kind of helping flourish and build that cohesion, which is really wonderful to see. And then the next project is our next project here in Ōtautahi. It's in New Brighton, so a very different context. And I wanted to table this to you today because it took a completely different approach. And as I described earlier in my slides, actually required us to have a very different strategy in terms of tenure, in terms of typologies. So we're not yet on site. We've just got our tickets. We've got building consent. And this development will deliver a mixture of 1s, 2s, 3s and 4s, a mixture of tenures. So subject to government funding, we're looking to deliver some social rent, in partnership with community housing providers, some affordable rentals, so homes that are priced below the market rent, recognising there's a desperate need for good quality homes to rent for economically active people with jobs that cannot afford to purchase, and some homes that are going to be sold under what we call progressive home ownership terms, so assisted home ownership, some first home buyer housing and some private sale housing. So it's a really wonderful example of actually how we understood the need and we translated that to a development solution and some typologies. Now, what we could have done is we could have built and developed and got planning consent for about 70 homes, 2 beds, 1 beds, but we chose not to. We actually deliberately, within optimising density and optimising the outcomes we could create in terms of housing outcomes, we actually sought to respond to need within the confines of viability. And furthermore, with Te Paku Mariam, which makes it a really exciting project and is a great example of how we as an organisation aren't getting it right. We're learning and we're growing, and each time we're doing developments, we're finessing and our practice and getting a bit more sophisticated at this because it's hard work. But we have worked with the community to define our vision and really underpinned our development strategy through having a community investment and engagement plan, which actually speaks to the outcomes that we want to achieve in terms of social outcomes, economic change and environmental change. So I'm sorry, I'm going to be told off now, but thank you. Ngā mihi nui.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sophie. I'm a parent of 3 primary-aged children, and I've lived in city fringe townhouses since returning to Christchurch in 2014. I am also an urban designer with Elliot Sinclair, so I stand here as a resident, and my perspective is personal, but I also come with, I guess, a professional lens. This will be a familiar scene to a lot of you who have lived overseas in London. This is obviously grey skies and brick terrace homes. But it was my home for a long time, and it was the first place that I'd lived in, I guess, medium density terraces. And it felt like a really wonderful way to live. There was public transport, it was easy to move around. Clapham Common was just up the road. And I really enjoyed that lifestyle, but it also felt like it was an age and a stage. And when I came back to New Zealand, of course, I would choose something else. That's what everybody else did. And everything else, looked like this for me. This was something, we went to Wellington. We chose a railway cottage in a really lovely street in Ngaio called Tarakaka Settlement. And it literally was the white picket fence. And it was a 90 square metre cottage, which had been there since the 1930s. It was mass housing and put there in the day, so it was that 10 dwelling per hectare, which Guy talked about. But it was a small house on a huge section and with a beautiful aspect. But it also was quite isolated in a way. Yes, there was a train station, there were some shops, and there was a park across the road, but I felt like once I started having my family and having children, it would be me in the car the whole time. I had to get into town, I had to move, take the children places, and it felt like it was going to be very much based around the car, and I thought, that's not what urban design is for me. But it was an interesting sort of lesson for me that when I then moved down to Christchurch, my first when I came back to live here, I was in Sumner. And I found that I was trying to move around the city the same time everybody else was, and with a toddler in the car, trying to get into town from Sumner was really stressful. I wanted to feel connected to the city that I was regenerating. And so even as an urban designer who studies and designs these types of homes, it took me a while to realise that, I guess, proximity to place was more important to me than ample space. So that's sort of what I'm going with. Yeah. So this is the street I live on now. It's City Fringe, it's in Mirabelle. And it doesn't look great at the moment, I admit. It's sort of in transition zone. It's got a construction site across the way. We've got 5 new townhouses coming through. There's been a number of townhouses being built. You can see the apartment building down the end, which is where Hagley Park is. The townhouses carry on, and up the other end is a school. So I live on this side of the street in a 3-bedroom townhouse, which has a garage. It's 2-storey, and it has a courtyard. So I actually, it's an interesting one for me because for me, medium density is both the typology, the house itself, but also medium density is the neighbourhood that that house is in. So it's the proximity to places. And a city fringe for me allows me more time and more choice. So I choose to live in a smaller house with that option to walk because it's much less stressful, because it seems to me that when I want to travel, to pick up children, to do those sorts of things, it's when everyone else is travelling in the car. So I guess my important, I also wanted my children to learn that the city was their place to experience and the neighbourhood was their place to use as well. My important learnings would be that young children like to be really close to you when they're little and play exactly where you are, mostly under your feet. And so it doesn't matter how big your house is, it doesn't matter how many rooms you have, they will want to be near you. So actually the size of your home sort of feels quite small no matter what when those children are quite little, but when they get bigger, they choose to go to their bedrooms more. They want that bit more space. So actually a two-storey townhouse is interesting. If everything's on the single level, you can use those spaces more easily. But with the two-storey townhouse, it does feel like a wee bit smaller, even if the floor area is the same. My other learning is that once your child is about 4, they can kick and throw a ball, and your garden will never be big enough to keep that ball contained. So it's actually really important. We've got the park up the road, we've got the school up the road, and we use those playing fields all the time to go and kick the ball, throw the cricket ball, do that sort of thing, because it just is less stressful. I like that I have one front door and I have one back door to my courtyard because I feel secure. One thing I'd say about medium density is you don't always have a lawnmower. I don't have any grass in my courtyard. So grass berms are really tricky for townhouses. I'm lucky we have it planted, but it's actually something to consider for the council that it's not always easy to keep your berms tidy if you are living in medium density. I guess for me, being close to work, to school, to the city means I have options. I do bike often, which is great, and I think I'm city fringe in Maryvale, but I often look at Hagley Park and I think there's lots of sides to Hagley Park, and it can either be the most wonderful and sort of green and leafy commute to where you need to be, or it can be the world's biggest roundabout for a driver. So you're either driving around it or you're getting that benefit of going through it, and that's what I love about where I live on that city fringe. Oh God, I'm always going the wrong way. Hang on. Can you go forwards too? Thank you. Right, my final slide. This one's one of my favourite pictures of Christchurch. It was in 2019. It was a part of the city that was regenerating in its own special way. I want my children to be able to experience the city in this way with colour and culture and places that they feel comfortable in. And this is an interesting one for me because this is in the South Frame in Sugarloaf Lane, and now you will find a 6-storey apartment building right next door to that. So these residents have that as their back garden or their front door as their playground. And I just think it'd be great to think about what your house needs to do for you and also what you look for in your neighbourhood, because that's the way I've chosen to live. Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not a counsellor. I'll just pass that one off, Mark. Can you just pass that on? Shift it on one for me. So kia ora koutou everyone. I am not a counsellor for the City Council. I am the Head of Transport and Waste at the City Council, and part of what I wanted to talk to you today about is how these spaces interact with the public realm space. So that's why I'm here to talk. And the things we think about. So from a council perspective, as was pointed out earlier, medium density has been going on for a while. We've had, it's not a new phenomenon, and it has been increasing. So the developments have been increasing over the last sort of 6 years with multi-unit developments, more multi-unit developments being undertaken across the city. And hopefully we've got more and more coming. Hang on. Yes. We all love Venn diagrams, don't we? This is a great one. But if we think about council and the decisions that we make, so all of those multi-unit developments and all of the single-unit developments, they all have to interact and they all interact through that street space that we've got. All of our services travel along those spaces. But a natural consequence of sprawl is that it's inherently less efficient. We've got to have more of that public realm space. Now, this diagram tries to point out to you how if we want to keep rates low but have stable levels of service, we have to change our density patterns and how we build. So the converse is, if we want lower density, we have to accept that we either have a lower level of service, for maybe public transport, or we have higher rates because we need to provide more infrastructure to get to it. The one part about this diagram is that little bit in the middle doesn't really exist, doesn't exist. You can't, like a lot of systems, you can't get all three sides working. It's the whole time, cost, quality diagram. You can have two, but you can't have the third one. So how do we manage that compromise and how do we work on it? But if we take we're working to not have low density, to have more high density, medium density development. No, we're not. Yes, we've got to get to it. Could be bad news. More people in the same space. We've got the same road space outside it. So imagine them all sitting inside a car or inside multiple cars. One car each. We're all coming out. We're going to have more congestion. Where are we going to park? Noise, pollution, reduced amenity. You could be right to think that. And it could be bad news, or I might not be able to change the slide. There we go. Oh, too many. Go back one for me. Who's going to manage it? There we go. Or it could be great news. Because if we think about that space on the street, not for cars but for people, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight. How is that space for people? If they're not inside cars, they could be walking around the streets, could be spending money. The picture could be quite different. More pedestrians, more retail, more vibrancy, more activity, more people on public transport, more people on cycles. It's always good, isn't it, Alara? Yeah. So medium density really helps the planning case for changing how we travel. And everyone gets a bit closer together, but it gives us a better case for changing how we travel. So we can start thinking about bigger plans like mass rapid transit, bigger cycleway networks, cleaner air will be an outcome, reduced greenhouse gas emissions, and overall better public health. All of those things. The more active we are, we all know the better we've got from a public health perspective. So, I'm going to... Oh, sorry. We've... There's been a number of talks recently at Council, and there's a lot of work going on right at the moment around our broader Christchurch transport plan. And this is actually two pictures that are out of that discussion that we've had with councillors recently. If we want to move more people in the same space, we've got to think about doing it differently. So the picture on that side, because I'm not great with my left and my rights, on the right-hand side, you can see all the people standing there with either their walking shoes on or their bicycles. Those same people fit into that number of cars or into our bus. So you can see how we are pushing, when we're always trying to use a car, we're pushing the space that we have to do a lot more. But the other advantage of reducing the number of cars we have on the road, or the number of times we use our car, because it's not about not using cars, is that we can create much nicer public realm spaces that interact with the developments that they border and become a nicer space to live in and a much more community-focused space. And I think it's really important that we think of our public realm as a space, like I said before, for people, not for vehicles. So what are we doing at council? And what are the programs that are going on that are going to help us adapt? We have a big program of work coming at us around public transport. We are in the middle of a big program of work around cycleways across the city. Those all interact to create more walkable neighbourhoods. There's a number of parking management studies and area studies that are going on, one of which is just finished in the Mirabelle area. We're working to green our streets. We've got an urban forest policy, so more trees make those streets less cooler and less black, I think is the word. So then we end up with healthier streets. We're also looking and working hard right at the moment on the speeds that everyone travels. If you can slow everyone down, we all get where we want to go, but we can do that safely. So there's a lot of work going on. I think the next one is the other half of my remit is the rubbish side of it, and it was brought up recently in a couple of the presentations. What do we do? Because it's not great getting down the street. If we want to create a walkable neighbourhood that's easy to get around, you can get on your scooter or you can get on your bike. Having loads and loads of bins can make it really difficult, make it a real hazard. But also you think about medium density housing, you've got a much smaller space and you want to get all of those bins in that small space outside it. It's not ideal. So there is work that's going on, and there is an opportunity for these developments to work with council to opt out of the curbside collection. And there's a benefit to that because they opt out at the rates ways. But we need to put the work in. So council is committed to minimising the amount of waste that is going to landfill. So recycling as much as possible, including the organics, which is all going on at the moment. So diverting it as much as we can, as much waste as we can from landfill. So if a development has a system that allows that to be as good or better than what council's already got, then they can opt out of the curbside system and effectively opt out of the related rates. So there are systems for that. We've also looked at the flexibility that we've got within the system we have. At the moment, that's a challenge with the contracted system we've got for the curbside, but that is being worked on as well. So, but that's also another use that we have to use that space, that limited space that we have within the road corridor to collect every week. So I am going to finish. Mine was really quick here because it's council after all. This is a quote from Ed Glazer, and I really like it. It's the cities are the absence of physical space between people, and if we keep thinking about our cities being about people, then we'll always start making good decisions. And that's what we're trying to do at council too. Tracey and Gareth.
Kia ora koutou katoa, nama hinui kia koutou. My name's Gareth Bizet. I'm a theologian. I work as the Director of Theology House, which is an education ministry associated with the Anglican Church in Christchurch. I won't be taking questions on either cathedral. I'm also working on my doctoral thesis on aspects of the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas. Tracey and I bought a 2-bedroom townhouse off the plans, and we moved in just over 2 years ago. This was one of 21 units in a development not far from Latimer Square, and there's a nearly identical development next door. And there are other developments recently finished, underway, or planned in the neighbourhood. And while the property is freehold, there's a residents' association which has a similar function to a body corporate. I spend a couple of days a week at the Anglican Centre on Tuam Street, just past the courts near St Michael's Church. It's an easy 20-minute walk, although I often take a lime scooter. I normally have to grab a coffee and a scone on the way as a bribery to myself to get me to go into the office. I spend a lot of the week at home, either working for my job or working on my studies. I go to church at the Transitional Cathedral, which is just around the corner, and sometimes I'll preach there for a Sunday evensong service. I prefer to drive as little as possible. In an ideal week, we'll only do one trip to the supermarket, maybe a couple of errands on Saturday morning, but life being what it is, I normally end up doing another trip or two.
Hi, I'm Tracey Wakefield, and I work full-time managing a charitable trust. And I also split my week from working from home and also working at a dog-friendly workplace, which is about a 10-minute walk, but if I'm taking the dog, it can be up to 40 minutes, just depending on what mood he is in. I have previously worked as a mental health counsellor, and I currently work as a people manager, and I have a chronic illness, so self-care and wellbeing are things that are really important to me. So having this really simple life where I get to work from home, get to work with the dog, get to walk everywhere is something that's really important to me. So there's no long commute stuck in a car. And everything is within walking distance. I'm also an introvert who loves peace and quiet, but I'm also someone who loves being around other people, not necessarily talking to other people, but being around other people. So our situation works for me really well. And I love being able to walk everywhere. I grew up in a small town that was, to get to the city, it was at least an hour's drive. So it's quite nice to just be able to go for a 5-10 minute walk and be in the city. I also love art. So living in Christchurch City is absolutely amazing. Especially the street art that we have. And one of my other interests is I get dressed up in vintage fashion and like to go out to cocktails, and we have the best cocktail bars in Christchurch. Gareth and I have been married for nearly 20 years, and we never really wanted to buy a house. We weren't that interested in it. We didn't see the point, especially as we don't have children. But that all changed when we decided we needed a fur baby. And as other people who have maybe rented before, trying to find pet-friendly rentals is really difficult, especially when you want a large greyhound like our boy Nando. And we tell him that we purchased our home for him, and it is completely true. Our whole lives revolve around him. And he has his pick of beds and couches, but as you can see from that photo, he likes to sleep on the stairs. And he has adapted to city life really well and always wants to go into the city because that's where the people are, and the people give him pats and sometimes even treats.
Tracey and I have lived centrally in Wellington and in the suburbs in Wellington, Auckland and Christchurch, and we definitely prefer to be in town. We were first home buyers in our early 40s, and our townhouse was a home that we could afford without a crippling mortgage. It was under the first home grant limit, and so between that and our KiwiSaver we ended up borrowing under 80%. While we have no plans to sell anytime soon, on paper it's worked out to be a very financially sound decision. I feel incredibly lucky, in theological language we would say blessed, to enjoy the lifestyle that we have. Taking Nando to pubs and cafes where he is genuinely welcomed and loved is really wonderful for us. The bins are a pain. Not having off-street parking is a pain, but frankly I'd sacrifice a lot to avoid a commute. So far, there have been really very few trade-offs for a life that we really love.
And this photo is from, we now have a tradition that we go to the last word on the day of our anniversary of moving into our house. So this is the 2nd year anniversary that was this year, and as you can see, Nando loves it there. If Nando has his own Instagram, so if you do want to follow him, it is Nando in the City, so feel free to do that.
Guy, do come. Joseph, we have. Fantastic. Thank you, everyone. Really, especially wonderful to hear from people living in these places. Now, we are running at least 10 minutes over, so I'm going to only ask one of the questions I've prepared, and I've heard from the team that there are a lot of questions from you all. So I'm going to ask the first one, and then the rest are over to you. I was really struck by a quote in Guy's book, Medium, from someone in Toronto, and the quote is, "If we wish to reduce our carbon footprint, then the single most powerful tool at our disposal is middle density intensification in established walkable neighbourhoods." Now, I'm aware that all our lived experience people are either city fringe or in the inner city, but this suggests that we should be looking at intensification in, inner suburbs, places where perhaps there's substantial opposition to this kind of intensification. So do you have any ideas, quick ideas on how we could, one simple thing we could do to make it more acceptable to people, Annie, perhaps your way of working within neighbourhoods, Lynette, something to do with how we treat our public streets. Guy, up to you. One quick idea.
One quick idea. Large bulldozer. I went down Riccarton Road today. There's just unmitigated suburban dross. I just demolished the whole lot of it. Buy them out, obviously, negotiate, but we've got to start demolishing so that we can start rebuilding.
Okay.
I think I said it in my presentation. I think the key thing really is that you consult with the community and talk to them. No, I really believe it. I know we're quite scared of doing that here, and often the conventional approach of a developer is to take the path of least resistance, which, yes, makes sense from a commercial perspective, get you planning, crack on. But actually, if you're looking to develop housing and make a positive contribution to the local community, why should you be scared of consulting with them? Why should you be scared of recognising and having a frank and candid conversation and saying, this site is zoned, it's coming forward for redevelopment, but we want to work with you to make sure we can have a positive contribution. And I think the approach, in fact, I know that the approach that we take, where we seek to really understand what the housing need is and how we're positively responding, is how you win the community over. We saw that in New Brighton, where we're developing affordable housing there, which, there's a huge need. More often than not, this is the first time in my career where the overwhelming response of the community has been so positive because we're providing affordable housing, and that's because of the community engagement. So I stand by it.
And I think you've got to create amazing public spaces, and your developments have to link well with those public spaces and work with the council so that the bins aren't a problem.
Great, thank you. Mitchell, let's hear some questions.
Yeah, so this is a bit of a follow-up question from the same topic. Is a lot of the examples you gave us were based around larger lots and having the space to make public spaces. How can policymakers, central and local government, help facilitate the land amalgamation necessary to design these medium-density developments?
I think, yeah, obviously when you have larger sites, there's more that you can do, and the economies tend to work better. But I think, it's a shame we haven't actually got any physical completed homes on Te Pakumaru, our project, but these sites are very small. And as I said in my slide where I sort of set out those parameters, actually adhering to some of those key principles about balancing privacy over surveillance and thinking about, engendering security and looking at, engendering a sense of belonging are key. You don't necessarily, I think in certain contexts, depending on the location of sites, actually having communal living space is needed, but actually where you're next to a park and you've got ample local amenities, then you don't necessarily need to always design them in. I know that's probably a controversial view, but I don't think it's always needed.
Look, I think the key point about your question, Mitch, is that these things can only be done by the government, the council, or the other big landowner, which is the local iwis. And they are the big property holders, and they're the only people that can really push redevelopment on that scale. It's really hard to make a revolution in housing when you're just developing site by site, so we actually do need a coordinated approach.
Sorry, we're going to just take our questions through Mitchell, if that's okay.
Just another one from the text. How do we legitimately make more housing more affordable when private developers make up the majority of the market and are solely driven by profit? Doesn't this show a lack of value housing as a human right if we leave it to profit-driven corporates?
I absolutely agree with that. I mean, that's the principle of who we are. Kāinga Maha is all about. We make the commercial return, absolutely not the same commercial return as a developer does, but what we do with the return that we need to make to ensure a scheme is viable and fundable is reinvest that. The solutions goodness there is no, unfortunately, silver bullet to address that. I think there are a number of policy levers that councils can use. I mean, here in Christchurch, they are very enabling, actually. So Karamu, we delivered the 28 homes that were for social housing, for social rent, and actually we got a development contribution rebate. So there are relief systems. I think inclusionary zoning is a mechanism that can be used where there's a trade-off with ensuring viability isn't compromised. And I think a key piece is actually the local authority having an understanding of that need in the first instance, so that the market and those developers, because there are quite a few that actually really want to make a difference and address housing need, understand what that needs to look like in terms of affordability, in terms of typology.
Guy, do you?
Just a very quick thing, which is we can also develop differently. We don't have to develop everything. In New Zealand, we think that everything has to be fully finished and every bit of paint done by the developers and all that sort of thing. There's a Chilean, I think, architect called Aravena, Alessandro Aravena, I think, and he builds half houses. He builds a row of townhouses, and he builds every second house, and he leaves a gap in between, so that he builds these really small spaces which people can buy and they're affordable, and then later on, when they've earned the money, they can actually fill out the second half themselves. So that if we think, we need to think cleverer, think different.
Just a bit of a question. We've had a few questions around sunlight. I think a lot of the opposition that we've had in Christchurch to this medium density rules is the access to sunlight. What do you consider is adequate access to sunlight? And a lot of the examples that have been shown were quite 5-6 stories, and they provide a lot of shading. So how do you see many good examples around providing good access to neighbours' sunlight, or do you see any other solutions to that?
That's about 3 questions. Can we have what the sort of minimum sunlight requirements you think should be met?
There's actually a part of the building code section F, is it? I don't know, yeah. One of the clauses of the building code which actually describes how much minimum amount of daylight you can get in you should be able to have. And I think most developments probably don't pay any attention to that, and most of them quite possibly don't actually achieve that. Look, this may strike you as odd, but I'm very passionate about higher density housing, but I also am stung by it. I live in Wellington, and some evil bastard has just stuck a 13-storey tower directly opposite my house, and I'm on the second floor. So I've got 11 stories directly above me on the other side of the road, which blocks out every shred of light during the day, and yet I'm still advocating for it. So if the entire street was 13 stories tall, then there would be no hope, and I would go home and kill myself. But because it's I'm not joking, but because it's piecemeal, then these things means that there is light that creeps around the edges and things like that. So there are ways of getting around it, but don't fear the 60-degree angle too much. You know, the people who complain that their view is being blocked out because it's 1 story higher than them, I say to you, go home and think again. That's a very polite way of putting what I wanted to say to them.
I'm a bit worried about time, so maybe pick your next 2 best questions, Mitchell.
Okay, this is a question for Alara. Do you have many friends that have a similar living arrangement to you, like same sort of apartments? And with the friends that don't have it, do you speak much about your living arrangements with them, and what do they think about how you live?
I don't have many friends who also live in the city. I don't think at all. But whenever I seem to talk about it, they always take a lot of interest in it, and they're always like, whoa, you live in an apartment? Isn't that like so futuristic and really interesting? And I think that's quite nice, because it is a great place to live.
Fantastic.
Good stuff.
And I'll just remind you, Alara is the future.
Yes. Okay, and so last question. Our bureaucracy has the half-G, quarter-acre Pavlova paradise ingrained in it. How can we move away from the laws, regulations, rules and covenants that dictate low-density lots and restrict medium-density living and allow for community-related commercial spaces and third spaces?
I don't think I can even...
Oh, I
all of that
think you
question.
can, because to me the thing that you've talked about and the thing that needs to be drilled into our heads is that this kind of land use change needs to be matched with transportation.
Absolutely,
It's not going to work without it. I loved that photo that Guy showed that demonstrated how car dependent we are. So even in medium density, the only solution to that is transportation and is a shift in our transportation system. So you've got the answer, Lynette.
So what I see is, or where we're heading, is the protection of corridors for better public transport, which will help encourage medium density along it. But we've got to build great public spaces as well, because if we don't, then nobody's going to want to live there. But we've got to make it easier, and we've started to do that journey here in Christchurch. It's a great place to travel around. It should be the best place to walk around and cycle around and scooter around, because it's flat. It's a jolly sight easier than Wellington. And it should be like that, and it should be easy, and that's what we're working to do, and our council is working to do. But like everything, it's a balancing act. So we've got to just keep on that journey, which is just, we're in the early phases of.
I can tell we're being given the rush on now by the tech team because we are running late. I'm aware that we could hold this conversation again and just have a panel, so don't worry, I have absorbed that fact tonight. But I would like to thank you all so much for your intelligent contributions and ways you've answered questions, including you, Alara. Cool. So thank this lot. And you might want to listen to our poet from down there or up here, it's up to you. But Ben, I don't even know, Ben, there you are, welcome. We've always include poetry in Christchurch Conversations, and this is Ben O'Connell, who is an Ōtautahi-based poet and a reporter. Ben, you've got the last word on housing.
You should follow Nando in the City, it's so good. Okay. So I'm a very punny guy. And so this is, I hope the crowd groans. So it's just a lot of housing puns. Oh, there are lots of people. Wow, okay. Well, tonight sure has given us lots to dwell on. Remember, the key to success is finding the right door. You know your dream home is just one mortgage away, right? When it comes to renovating, if it's on the house, it's free, right? No? Okay. When you expect a penthouse, but you don't get one, is that called having lofty expectations? When the apartment you bought is too small, is it called the condo minimum? When religious door knockers meet you at your high-rise home, is it momentarily called a repent house? When pests move into your apartment, is it called a mouse pad? 9 ants is hard enough, but imagine needing to evict 10 ants. When you feel soulless and empty at home, is it still called a living room? When your upstairs neighbour blasts country music 24/7, is it called Keith Urban Housing? When there's hope, a vision, change for good on the horizon, is it called the future of Ōtautahi? Okay. And this other one is called apartment complexity, but I don't know if I like that. Anyway, if home is where the heart is, mine's been run over by a tram. If 15 minutes is walkable, our flat city is a scam. Is any house affordable if I can't afford a bell? I can't afford a door at all, ain't that adorable? When did a healthy home become privilege, not requirement? Unlike the I in team, there's rent in my retirement. And a poem in every problem, but who has to solve them? Why house the homeless when you can just rickroll them? 17,000 empty homes, 42,000 housing deprived. On a scale from 1 to 10, housing costs, we ranked 6.5. These numbers don't lie, but some leaders sadly do. Downplaying misuse and news, abusive views, we are just so screwed. But we can refuse and choose to face the issues, like how the earthquake rebuild perpetually continues. Let's build each other up by building up the city. And by the way, those noise complaints were downright shitty. Let's make space for spaces, embrace changes, all of that. Let's flatten buildings the opposite of flat. Let's commit to community, connection, consent. If this poem's my income, the rest goes to my rent. If only those with uncommon dollars had some common sense. What's so intense about residential intensification? What's so intense about meeting the needs of the whole nation? So let's get proper on property, in the zone on zones, because we don't just deserve houses, we deserve homes. Thank you.
Ben, that was marvellous. Thank you so much. And thanks to my colleague Em at home, who knew that there was a poet in Ōtautahi that wrote poems about housing. This conversation reminds me of a line from another poet that I think is really important to recall here. It's a poem by American poet Mary Ruffle called I Remember, and it's about the consistency of change in our lives. And the line goes, I remember the first time I realised the world we are born into is not the one we leave. So a huge thank you to all our speakers, to Guy, Annie, Lynette, Alara, Sophie, Gareth, Tracey and Ben. Thank you everyone for kicking off a more constructive conversation on medium density and other forms of density, hopefully, housing here in Ōtautahi, because the reality is it is here. The alternative of endless sprawl will turn us into Auckland, and everybody knows no one from Christchurch wants to be an Aucklander. With Auckland's transport agonies and inefficiencies and expense. Getting good at density can truly benefit current and future generations and help us create a more sustainable city. We could, though, really get it wrong, and we can and we should do better as a society. And just because it isn't ideal now, right now, doesn't mean we should abandon this effort. Instead, we need to learn more about it and face it, willing to and determined to ask for better. We hope tonight's Christchurch Conversation is one contribution to a more constructive conversation on denser housing, and I hope we'll continue to find ways to shape a better future for us and our children after us, for the world we are born into is not the one we leave. I'd like to thank again the supporters of He Whakawhiti Kōrero Christchurch Conversations, the Christchurch City Council, thank you Douglas, next slide, and He Puna Ora Regenerative Lab Action Lab at AUT. Remember, you can find the recording of tonight's event on the Te Pūtahi YouTube channel if you'd like to share it with others. And do please save the date for our next and final Christchurch Conversation this year on the 28th of November. It's called Can Cities Improve Wellbeing? And will be held here at Tūranga at 6 p.m. on that date. Come and hear from a range of experts who will talk about the intersection between how we can design our cities for wellbeing outcomes for both human and more than human beings and living systems. You can book for this now. Pō Mārie.
Your talk was good, and shorter than mine, which was the key thing.